Let's see what it is that you guys want me to watch. All right, fresh from inside Star Citizen Review. Hi, everybody. Welcome to DJ360. We're watching a vid from my friend here, Space Tomato, about player-made contracts, and he thinks that they will fuel Star Citizen's dynamic economy. I couldn't agree more. We talked a lot about that on the Inside Star Citizen Review. Let's see what he has to say.
There is something special about doing something in a game and knowing it affects other players. And I'm not talking about like killing a couple enemies and making the path clearer, or, you know, blowing somebody's ship up from the inside.
Those are cool too.
Yeah, jerk. No, I'm talking about the general chaos of an MMO, being able to just do things in the game and know it affects the way the game plays. More specifically, though, I'm talking about player-made missions. And in today's Feature Watch, we're going to talk about player-made missions and the quantum economy, or StarSim as they're starting to call it, and how these things are actually going to really affect the way this game flows. If you haven't been to a Feature Watch before, this is a small series where I just kind of take a topic from the last week of Star Citizen's development and give you a little bit of a deeper dive on the history and the plans for that in a more casual setting than the Tomato Talks. So player-made missions are something that players have gotten a little bit nervous about over the last couple months, mainly because in 3.23 passenger transport beacons basically disappeared. Now, we don't know if that's a glitch or not, but this has made people a little more nervous about the beacon system taking a step back, but it's not. In fact, it's been acknowledged in the last Star Citizen Live that the system is, much like the economy, just not in a great place.
Player contracts and job boards. Will players ever be able to set up contracts to have cargo or items hauled by other players?
So we do have player beacons, and I know what that current state of that is, but that is
Nick?
a system.
What is the current state? Go ahead, admit it.
Worked perfectly.
It's a feature, but that's something which we. It's like the economy. It's
non-existent. Oh, sorry.
See, this is the part that gets me, like, this part got me upset watching this shit, because they're making it like a fucking joke. If I was Chris, I'd be cracking fucking whips up in this fucking thing. Like, this guy's trying to keep it fucking serious, but then can't. It really made me think like there's no work being done when they're talking like this, you know? And like, I thought it was completely unprofessional. Is, you know, they're laughing and shit and they're making jokes and they're laughing with the player base, but at the same time, the joke's all on all of us. You know what I'm saying? So like, people are hungry for an economy, man. People want it. And we're like, let's go. Right? A lot of us are under the impression that we're not really going to get the economy that we want until dynamic server meshing, or the first implementation of dynamic server meshing, is down and functioning. I don't know. I mean, I think we can play around with it a little bit, can't we? I mean, I'm not quite sure, but I mean, like, let's at least try some different things. I do think that the step towards physicalized cargo is great. Persistent hangars is great. I like where we're going. So yes, there are good things happening, but there needs to be more good things happening, and frankly, at a much faster rate. So when I see people that are involved with the project that are kind of like snickering and laughing about the fact that there's nothing being done, or at least that's the appearance that they're giving me, it makes me upset, dude. Like, it's just like, okay, yeah, it's funny, but it's not really funny, you know?
It's like the economy. It's
non-existent. Oh, sorry. Carry on, Nick.
Okay.
Yeah, this is pre-recorded, and if that still makes it into the show, know that I don't value my job.
I'm glad he put it in there. I'm glad Jared kept that in there, man. He's just being very transparent. Like, this is when people say that Jared or Inside Star Citizen or Star Citizen Live is not transparent, I point to this. Jared's decision to keep this in is good. Right. Like the reason, when people give Jared a lot of shit, but like, Jared could have cut this out. I do tons of editing. And, you know, like, you can construct your narrative kind of however you want when you're the editor, right? I give him props for keeping this in. because it's really, that is the transparency I want to see. I want to see people's reactions. I want to get the vibe. And the vibe to me is they're not doing anything in terms of beacons.
Yeah. Yeah, Elliot's still working at the company. Okay, it's good. Yeah. But ultimately, this answer we got from Nick after Elliot's little interruption was pretty good confirmation that player-made missions are very important to the game.
To answer the question, Elliot, the beacon system is something which provides for players to contract other players, and it's a system we will be looking to expand upon in the future. And personally, I think that this side of the economy is fundamental, given that we are having a hybrid economy.
Yeah.
So
Good recovery.
systems.
I dig this dude. Like, you know, this economy designer here. I don't know how long he's been employed with Cloud Imperium, but like he does try and keep things on a professional keel. So I'm happy he kind of recovered from it, because it was a train wreck. But still, I was upset when this happened.
We got you. While players won't exclusively control the economy in this game, allowing players to make missions for other people is going to be really good at keeping players engaged with each other and like keeping the game alive. And if you think about it, this is pretty key for solo players. If you didn't want to get involved in a huge group or sign up to get your friends online whenever you wanted to go do something, but you still wanted to take part in something.
No, this isn't an echo chamber. You vent, Backspace. It's okay, man. What happened to you, bro? Let me just type it in. Let's hear what happened.
With that bigger scaled gameplay, now you can do it without ever having to talk to people. You can just take missions that are assigned by other players, benefit from the fact that it's an MMO, but not necessarily have to go and get into a group. It's also really important though, because it shows us the direction of the economy that's planned to be pretty dynamic and actually changing based on what players are doing, thus allowing you to affect other people's gameplay. This is actually pretty in line with what we've seen from previous quantum economy demonstrations, which we will get to in a little bit. Now, later in the same
absolutely agree. I've said that for a long time, Caveman. I'd like it to mimic EVE Online's economy, a player-driven economy, because player-driven demand is the most natural demand, and everything gets sorted by actual gamers and player demand. And some people get really upset. They go, oh my God, they're going to exploit the system. And, you know, like, I got to get it impressed upon people that don't trade for a living in the real world, or that get involved in this kind of game mechanic in games that give you a dynamic economy in an MMO. And I got to impress the point that exploiting the system in an MMO in regards to economic gameplay is called the margin.
Yes, sir. You're not gonna hit me. Yes.
That's what we call the margin, and this is the gameplay that happens in the real world and also on EVE Online. And so, yes, Caveman, I couldn't agree with you more, dude. And you know, yes, there should be some policing of it in terms of farming. Absolutely, you know. Credit farming, all that shit. But in terms of letting players kind of figure out where they want to sell their goods, who they want to sell it to, what they're making, I mean, like, you know, player supply, player demand is going to sort everything out and do the work for Cloud Imperium. So they don't have to go crazy on all these algorithms and AI trying to simulate actual player demand. My 2 cents.
Talk, it's actually specifically mentioned by Elliot that there will be chances for refineries or other locations to receive goods based on your cargo running route or your mining or whatever you're doing, and transform those goods into another good or a product. And then another mission would be generated somewhere in the verse that would require a cargo hauler to come pick up those goods and take them somewhere else, like a storefront or another factory. Now, we don't know which location would generate that mission, but this is a pretty important part of the economic chain that they had planned out for Quantum.
But yeah, we're going to have missions where you have to bring resources to a location, and then naturally that location would then take those resources, produce something, and then another location would then consume what that location produces, and that makes the what do you call it, the hauling sort of mission.
This was actually reflected in the March monthly report. If you go back and look, it talked about how the economy team identified producers, transformers, and sinks for all resources, essentially categorizing all the locations, outposts, factories, cities, distribution centers within the economic chain. This is the quantum system, soon to be officially known as StarSim, it seems. They keep saying it
StarSim.
constantly.
StarSim.
Everywhere.
StarSim.
And this is the overall economic simulation that's meant to actually make Star Citizen interesting. Back in 2019, Tony Z, who, yes, is still working at the company as
Space Tomato knows, huh?
confirmed by a couple of friends who ran into him back in May,
Okay.
did give us a good preview of the quantum system and what they had planned for it back then. Now, it is a frustrating watch because it's taken so long to get here, but let's look back at those demonstrations.
We're going to add a little bit of interest to the system by adding an aluminum mine to Delamar. So now we're going to go ahead and add an aluminum refinery to Crusader.
That's kind of what I think too.
That refinery, it wants to build up a stockpile of aluminum, and in order to do that, it needs some raw aluminum ore. And
This was 4 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, 2019, 2020. No, there wasn't anything in 2020, but this was like 2019. And
this, it's willing to pay for it. And so the Quanta are seizing upon that economic opportunity, heading out to Delamar, doing the work, extracting that ore, and taking it back to the refinery. And this will continue until it until it's full.
Mad Styles, I was hoping they touch on this again this year at CitizenCon. They have to. They absolutely have to.
So what we're going to do now is at a factory. But before we do that, let's head on over to the power plant formula. And you can see here that building a power plant, just like refining ore, requires something. It requires 10 workers working for a duration of 60 ticks. And it also notably requires 2 units of refined aluminum ore in order to produce 1 power plant.
It's got to be more complicated than that, I promise.
They'll actually require ships. Ships require engines. And so all of a sudden there's a real demand for how many power plants do you need? How many ships do you need? It all follows those same logical equations.
If they're running that in-house, and they've been doing this for 4 years, I want this locked and loaded. Do you guys agree with that? Like, if they've been doing this in-house and not had to worry about server meshing or dynamic server meshing one bit, I want this locked and loaded. I wouldn't know why it wouldn't be locked and loaded and ready to go once dynamic server meshing hits. It wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't make any sense to me if this thing didn't fucking ship out the second that dynamic server meshing hit. Right? And I'm going to tell you, if it doesn't, I'm going to be fucking pissed off, because this can all be done in-house. And if dynamic server meshing, when it hits, right? If this is to come like right afterwards, I'm going to be upset.
How many ships do you need? It all follows those same logical equations.
While this process could include players or AI, this is still pretty consistent messaging on what they want the economy to do and how they want it to change based on what.
Here's basically the construction, the mapping of supply and demand, and how they're going to map resources, and how the algorithm's going to handle NPCs shipping from one area to another area. And that's all good. Okay. I when they showed this to me, I was like, okay, great. But at the same time, we had this done naturally and organically in EVE Online, and the developer CCP didn't have to even worry about doing anything because humans did it. You guys get what I'm saying? When people push back hard when I say I like player-driven economies, the reason I love player-driven economies are because you don't have to worry about all this coding. We do this work naturally. We do it because we need stuff in the game. We craft it, we make it, we sell it, we trade it, we ship it, we contract it. Yeah, the humans can do this. The gamer base can do this. But there's a huge pushback, and I always wonder why I got that pushback. I talked about this a long time ago, and people were just so scared for player-driven economies, and it really was like, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, Speem says, players don't have the same ethics, DG. Humans are greedy. Yeah, they are. And it happens all the time, and that's called the margin, right, Speem? And don't be afraid of that. That's how people get rich, and that's how people get poor, and that's the market, baby. That's how it rules, Speam. Unfortunately, it sounds cold, but that's the cold, hard truth of the matter, man. You know, that's how you learn. That's how you learn. That's called the learning curve. You got to figure out where your margins are at. You got to figure out who your customers are. You got to figure out the area you want to sell it in. You got to figure out the cost of your goods. There's all these things you have to figure to be a successful entrepreneur in this world. And it's the same mentality that went into the game mechanics of EVE Online. And it's why I loved EVE Online so goddamn much, because the learning curve was a giant fucking loop. You know, piracy is easier. Absolutely. It is. But like a lot of people like this gameplay in their head. You know, like I'm this crazy. This is how crazy I am. This is my type of gameplay. And I guarantee you there's a large player base that are industrialists that love to do this. They sit, they're armchair warriors. They have Excel spreadsheets and they put this shit together, right? I know a lot of them. Rave is one of them. And he created his own website to help you source this stuff, right? I know a lot of people that do this. I know a lot of people that come from EVE that went into Star Citizen hoping for something that they can do like this that's player driven. And I always wondered about the pushback on that, because I was like, we could not. Do you know how much time and money that Cloud Imperium could save if they just relied upon player base to do this? Now, you would have to structure it. You would have to structure the mechanics so that it could limit the amount of exploits, okay? And by exploits, I mean when people are abusing the system completely and using the game to work against the very game itself. And an example of that would be like the cargo duping that just happened recently, that they had to go in and, you know, people were using duping as an exploit that's not any good because it was creating supply artificially, and that was bad. That's what I consider like an economic exploit, okay? So, you know, when you're talking about a player that finds an area that's in an unlawful area of space that does not exist yet in Star Citizen, but it will, and you're going out there and you're loading, and you've gone to a manufacturing node and you've figured out how to get your costs down, and you've crafted in a whole bunch of SCU of items, and you've got it loaded up in your hull, and you're taking the trip out to Pyro, and you want to eventually sell it in Pyro, you should get a premium for those goods because you're taking a risk. It's TVR, time versus reward. It's exactly what the game designer, the economic game designer, was talking about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. That's not, those types of exploits are the margin. That's where you make your bank. And that's player-driven demand. That's what I'm talking about. We could do a lot of this work, and this would free up time on the end of Cloud Imperium devs. And, you know, it just doesn't make any sense to me, but if this is the way they want to go, okay. I just want to see if the AI can simulate actual player demand. I'm still very skeptical on this.
Players and AI are doing on the micro scale. The economy itself was originally...
There's nothing like that right now in the game. Absolutely. I'm talking about in the future what I want to see from the game. I think physicalized cargo, I'm speculating, by the way, I think physicalized cargo will be the next step towards player contracts. And it's interesting because the title of this video, where Space Tomato I think is going, is player-made contracts and the ability to go from player to player. And, you know, it's speculation, but like if he's going to talk about what been talking about for quite a while now, I think it's a step in the right direction because it's more player-driven. It's more player-driven.
Meant to be a 10-to-1 ratio of AI to players in the game so that players could have an effect on what's going on, but maybe not completely screw up planetary economies. Like, nobody wants there to be an overabundant supply of human waste on Hurston, but you know there's going to be an org that's trying to make that happen. This whole idea is supposed to allow for price changes, resource droughts, or even an overabundance of goods, like human waste. The kind of events that might push you to stockpile your commodities until you'll get better profit for selling them, or run a specific trade route on a specific date because there may be a blockade. Not talking about blockade runner, get out of here, go, shoot. But this still allows for there to be guardrails for the economy to self-correct through the simulation rather than having to depend on players to go and fix it eventually. This also means if there are no players to take responsibility in some certain geographic part of the game, eventually the game will still do that for you, like a medical beacon, a transportation beacon, or an escort. Chris Roberts says this much back in 2015, I believe, on a Reverse the Verse episode.
In general, even if we have millions of players playing the game, as you move around, you are probably more likely to encounter more AI than you are players, because we need it to have a world feel alive, which is one of the big differences with what the Star Citizen setup is.
I love Sandy's on her phone in the background. It's one of the best things ever, is watching Sandy just like on her phone, like, oh, I can't believe I gotta be here for this. And you know, like the sad thing is, right now when you're looking at AI, you're looking at NPCs standing on table, and you're seeing what a mess it is. It's more primarily the problem of the servers, you know, than anything else. But it's hard to imagine a very alive NPC-oriented environment, because all the NPC are broke. You know, it's really hard to see that. Almost as hard as it is to see Sandy in the background on her phone.
We can't rely on the player base, because at a certain time of night there may not be that many players, and then another time there could be a lot of them. So that's why we have this rule that the player base is going to be more than 10% of the overall sort of population of the universe. And so at that point, most of the people, by the very definition, if that's the case, 9 out of 10 of the people ships that you will meet will be AI, that will not be players.
We don't know how closely this is all still intended to be a part of the game, as it hasn't been explicitly stated that we're going to be a 10% part of the game since then, but that's kind of what we've been acting on, and the simulations that they've shown with Quantum definitely give the idea that AI are going to be a huge part of the traffic, the missions, the people you encounter, and the things that you do, so that you don't really have to worry about the unpredictability of players. Yeah, we like to break things. And this brings us back to those player-made missions. They could go much further than just commodity orders to a new location. We're talking data orders to survey a planet or find points of interest for you and your org to go and then exploit. Delivery missions to have vehicles transported to a certain location. Or simple requests for good engineers, turret gunners, or deckhands that could help you build out your crew when you don't have any friends. But in order for this to work, they're going to have to rely pretty heavily on that reputation system that has been oh so slow to build out, in order to make players even feel comfortable doing all of this. And also, I really hope that they do have actual job boards or public places on space stations where you can go and find your local missions. That'd be a nice touch, but I bet a lot of people would want to just use their Mobi glass. We'll see what they do. But the point I wanted to hit here was that the economy is still in the works in a big way. StarSim, Quantum, whatever you want to call it, just not Quanta, is still heavily in the works. And as we covered earlier this year with the video about Tony Z and the whole simulation, I would go check that out, there's more detail there. It's something they want to rely on for a lot of the dynamic gameplay in the game. And they've covered this in monthly reports and various talks throughout this year, so that's not going anywhere. We just don't know the details of it, and I don't know when we will. Honestly, that doesn't feel like something that's going to be very significant until after server meshing is in a good place, but this year they've talked about it way more than any other year.
Good.
So I do think with the economy...
Because I've been pounding the goddamn table. I told you, 2024, I'm going to pound the table on the economy. We got some economy talk. You're welcome.
I'm in a fountain.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Team working, the way they've been balancing prices across the monthly reports, talking about boosting mission payouts and figuring out how much risk versus reward gets you what you're paid. Things are starting to get at least dialed in to be tuned into this system. I can't tell you it's going to be here soon, but it's definitely still coming. And this is ultimately good.
This is the dopamine rush. I mean, like for me, the exciting part is being able to just like accrue massive amounts of wealth in your hangar now. It's persistent, which is great. You're not restricted just to the cargo in your ship, or the grid on your ship. You've got more room. You can store it there. It's physicalized. You can sell it whenever you want. That's a huge dopamine hit. Another dopamine hit was looking at the jump points from last week's Inside Star Citizen. Was freaking fantastic. Going into Pyro, the whole trip through the jump point was a dopamine hit. So there's a lot of positives, man. There's a lot of positives. So, like you just got to pick out your spot, man. And if you're having like Backspace is having a really hard time right now, and I understand it. I think every one of us hit those points in the development where we kind of hit the wall and we were like, But like, here's the thing. I'm at the end of the day, I still think that Star Citizen, in terms of the scope and what it's trying to do, I don't think there's any other title out there trying to do what they're trying to do in terms of basically creating a new technology that will transform the entire gaming genre. I don't really think there's anybody else out there trying to do that other than Ashes of Creation, which isn't necessarily dynamic server meshing. I talked about that. You can check the channel where I talk about that, and I watched Narc's video where he's reacting to dynamic server meshing. It's not necessarily dynamic. It's more like a grid. But anyhow, I applaud them. I applaud them over at AOC for trying to create a larger MMO base so that more and more players can experience and have those experiences. I think in terms of where we're going with gaming, it's just going to be fascinating. It's a huge dopamine hit that we're even doing this. It's very experimental. And I can't wait because somebody's going to do it, and I hope it's Cloud Imperium.
Because it gives players the ability to affect the game space, and give other people something to do based on your own gameplay.
Oh, yeah.
And honestly, a lot of you have bought tons of ships that you probably don't know exactly what to do with when you're just out there playing casually. Maybe this will give us the ability to loan out ships to people to run missions for us. Start your own cargo company and just loan out all your cargo haulers to people who get a little bit of the cut when they deliver stuff.
That's
and
cool
you just
idea.
Go off and do your own thing.
That's
I don't know. There's a
idea.
lot of possibilities with this, with player-made missions, and the fact that the economy is going to be dynamic, and I'm loving it. But that's it for this feature watch. I do want to say
That's cool. I dig Space Tomato, friend of the channel, and I really like his videos. They inspire a lot of talks, and we'll keep watching Space Tomato because I think some of the best talks that we have about Star Citizen's game design and the mechanics come from watching Space Tomato's vids. So Space Tomato, keep it up, dude. Gonna like that, and thank you, man. Thank you.